All right. I'm excited to be with you guys this morning. My name is Connor Graves, and I serve here as Director of Student Ministries. I normally just tell people I'm a campus minister. That's the easiest way to describe it. Also, want to give one quick shout out. I do get the privilege of serving with the tennis team as a volunteer assistant, so love the tennis team. Shout out to those guys. I don't know if any of them are in here. I'm not going to make them call themselves out, but love the opportunity to be here with you this morning. And let me just say from the outset, I want to make a little caveat. It's going to be a little different this morning. I'm going to do something a little different than what we typically do in chapel and what I typically would do. And there's a couple reasons. Well, let me just say, the way it's going to be different is this is not going to be a typical sermon or necessarily like Bible lesson. I'm not going to just open a passage and walk through it. And a couple reasons. One, I think variety is good, and I like variety in my life, and so there's different ways that we can approach learning about truth and culture and all those things. And two, I know that obviously there's a lot of you in here that love Jesus, and you are trying to grow in your relationship with Jesus, and you want to learn about those things, but I also acknowledge that there's some of you in this room that you would say you don't have a personal relationship with Jesus, that maybe you're not even interested in faith. And although I, as a campus minister, of course, would say I want you to believe in Jesus and I believe that he is what's best for you, I also want you to hear that I care about you as a person. And I believe that my calling, part of my calling here at NGU, is to help every student grow into a better man or woman and to be a better future employee and a better friend and a better spouse and a better teammate and all these things. And so my hope with this morning is that whether or not you choose to believe, again, what I believe is good and true, this gospel message, and put your faith in Jesus, my hope is that regardless, there would be something this morning that you could learn, you could take from it, and apply it to your life. And then, because I don't want to pull a bait and switch, I want to be upfront, at the end, I will circle back and talk about what does faith, and particularly Jesus and Christianity, have to say about the topic at hand this morning. So what is that topic? The topic I want to talk about this morning is what has been called expressive individualism. Expressive individualism, a part of our culture here in America in particular, really in the West in general, right? So this sociologist, Robert Bellah, defines it this way. He says, expressive individualism holds that each person has a unique core of feeling and intuition that should unfold or be expressed if individuality is to be realized. So there's two pieces to note in this definition. One is just the idea of individuality, right? That we are unique individuals with specific desires and emotions and feelings and thoughts. And there's this assumption in the definition there that those feelings and thoughts are amoral, like there's no value assigned to it. It's just a part of who you are. And then there's this emphasis on expression. That if I don't express these thoughts and feelings and emotions and intuition, etc., that are individual to me, then I will not realize this individual identity. That's what this ideology, this way of thinking called expressive individualism would teach. And there's been a lot of research and writing on this idea, this way of thinking. And there's one particular author named Carl Trueman who's put out a couple different works, one kind of bigger and more hefty and then a smaller one. So The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self is the bigger one, and then the smaller one's called A Strange New World. And he traces the origins of this way of thinking all the way back to Enlightenment thinkers. And I wanted to kind of walk through some of this, but for the sake of time, I'm not going to be able to. But it's really interesting if you take some time to read and look at it, how this way of thinking kind of works its way down through these different thinkers. And then he traces how some factors like technology in our world today and the sexualization of society and other societal shifts have influenced this way of thinking to get it to where we are today, to where we're left in this present moment with this pervasive idea that personhood, what it means to be a person or a human, personhood is primarily something that's discovered from within. That we look inward to discover who we are, and that fulfillment is found as I express that individual inward self, mostly without restraint, to the outside world. That's kind of where we're left today. And if you need any evidence that this type of thinking has worked its way into our society, particularly here in America, look no further than the wonderful world of Disney movies, right? Like, I could pick pretty much any Disney movie, but I'll just pick a couple that have been really popular in the past decade for us. So let's start with Frozen. Any Frozen fans in the room? I think it's a great movie. You don't have to be scared, okay? I was a late adopter. I didn't want to like it because everybody else liked it, but it's good. So Elsa, the main character, right, who is forced, as she says in her own words, to hide her true self for years and years until she gets to the point where she's finally ready to let it go, right? Where she can't hold it back anymore, and she doesn't care what they're going to say. Let the storm rage on, because the cold never bothered me anyway. And I would say that makes one of us Elsa. I hate the cold. I'm loving the warm weather. But basically what she's saying, I don't care what society would say. I don't care what bothers anyone else. I have to be my true self. I have to express that to the world. Or how about another one, a warmer weather option, Moana, right? The song in Moana, the really popular one, How Far I'll Go, right? She says, here's a line in there, I can lead with pride, I can make us strong, I'll be satisfied if I play along. So she's basically saying that's what other people are kind of telling and the pressure that others are putting on. But the voice inside sings a different song. So she asks, what's wrong with me? She's basically saying, these other people are telling me I could just fit in and I could contribute and all these things, but that would be keeping me from expressing my true self and expressing what I really feel and what I really want. Because what I really want is the sea, because it calls me, right? And no one knows how far it goes. Yes, you get it, right? She's wanting this and she has to express this. And I'm not saying all of this messaging is bad. I think some good things that we can see is that we shouldn't necessarily cave just to societal standards and expectations. And we certainly shouldn't blindly accept societal norms as morally good or right. So I think that's some good in that messaging. But what I'm trying to show this morning is that this idea of expressive individualism is all around us. In fact, it's a staple of what we are as a nation in America and what we were founded on. This escape from authority and powers, right? Abuses of those. And what's really crazy to me, this is actually super fascinating as I was reading and studying this. There was this guy, this Frenchman, named Alexis de Tocqueville. I probably butchered that name. But in the early democracy and just to learn how it works and to see, like, is it working? And what he finds, he's surprised and he's shocked by the individualism that he sees in America. In the 1830s, he writes that this radical self-reliance would actually be the downfall of humanity. In the 1830s, that's almost 200 years ago. So imagine where we are now, right? And whether or not he's right, we see this individualist way of thinking all around us, where we are urged to seek our true self and look inward to determine our identity, and that there are no external influences that can speak to the world who I am. I express that to the world, my inward individual identity to the external world. And ultimately, this gets billed as the pathway to life, liberty, or maybe better phrase, liberation, and the pursuit of happiness, as our Declaration of Independence puts it. And expressive individualism tells us that we achieve these rights by expressing those things from within. But lest we think this morning this is something that's only seen in radically secular circles, listen to this article that I found published on the internet from a self-proclaimed Christian author. Now, I should caveat, like, this is one of those public websites where people can post things, so I'm not saying that this person is like a thought leader necessarily, but this is a self-proclaimed Christian who published this article called The Liberation of Self-Acceptance. And she writes, in a world that often imposes predefined paths to success and happiness, the liberation of self-acceptance lies in embracing unconventional journeys that align with our true selves. It is through breaking free from societal expectations and embracing our unique passions, desires, and purpose that we discover true personal fulfillment. So that's the thought from a Christian. So this individualism, we can see, has crept its way into all parts of our society. And it can and probably has influenced all of us in some way, regardless of our faith. So this begs the question this morning, is it working? Is this idea of expressive individualism helping us actually achieve happiness, the pursuit of happiness that it promises? Well, statistics, data, and our personal experience would tell us, right, that we are experiencing anxiety and depression and other mental health issues at an alarming rate, particularly here in our country. So if we live in a world that maybe more than ever is supportive of me being my true self and chasing my own self-fulfillment and expressing my own individual desires, emotions, and beliefs, why then are we not happier? To answer that question, I want to take a second and actually look at the idea. Author Arthur Brooks about what makes. And he boiled down his research and his data to 4 pillars of happiness. A combination of satisfaction and things. And the 4 pillars he came up with are family, faith, friends, and work. I'm thinking, dude, you almost had a perfect alliteration there, but work at the end. Family, faith, friends, and work. Family, this nuclear family or extended family, sometimes maybe not even biological family, but these people that we're living with and doing life with and have these strong family ties with. And then faith, again, particularly just a philosophy or even practices that help make sense of life and death and suffering and this world, this physical world we live in. Friends that we feel safe with, that we know and are known by. And then work, meaningful work that we feel like contributes to something, to human flourishing, even maybe at a basic level. And he says if we have some combination of these 4 things, that contributes to our happiness. But what is really interesting, and I don't know if you caught this, is that in each of those 4 areas, there's a communal aspect to them. There's an outward focus to each of those. But this extreme expressive individualism that we live in pushes us further and further away from communal and further into isolation. I genuinely believe there is a connection in the rise in loneliness and mental health issues that we see in our society and this expressive individualism taking a deep root in our culture. Because here's the thing, this expressive individualism, I believe it necessitates walls going up. I look inward first, right? And I determine from inside who I am. And then I express a fortified version of that to the world. Where you can't touch it, you can't shape it, you can't tear it down. And you only get to be a part of my life if you affirm this version of myself that I've discovered and am now expressing. I'm reliant on no one but me. Or to quote a lyricist from my high school days, which you guys were like 4, but that's fine. INDEPENDENT. Do you know what that means? All right? That's independent for those of you that can't spell very well. All right? We are independent creatures. We believe that we don't need anybody else. But here's the thing. When we look inward and are unable to look outward, we actually are unable to have healthy, genuine relationships. Because any intimate, healthy relationship with another human requires a certain level of interdependency. where we're actually depending on one another for emotional connection and support, even shaping each other, where we create space to be vulnerable. We take down the walls, not projecting a fortified, walled up version of my true self, but instead lowering the drawbridge, inviting you into my inner self and allowing for repairs and improvements and additions. John Mark Comer, who's a pastor in Seattle, says, you can have autonomy or you can have loving relationships, but it's very hard, if not impossible, to have both. We are not made to survive, and we certainly cannot thrive without each other. This ability to be vulnerable. Our need for community is universal, and all throughout history we've understood this, that we need one another. That there's this need for intimate connections that I cannot fill by looking inward or on my own. And I believe this extreme individualism in our culture is keeping us from these things that contribute to happiness, largely by preventing us from experiencing deep, intimate connections with one another, or really just preventing us from looking to anything or anyone outside ourselves. And so the question is there a better way? Is there a different way? And so again, I want to put something forward first that you could take with you regardless of your faith this morning. And that's just to be willing to look outside yourself. To take the focus off of you. To not only look inward, but to look outward for meaningful connections marked by vulnerability where we can be shaped by one another. And to look outside yourself to contribute to something greater in your work and your life. Because to look inward for purpose and identity, though it may offer liberation, is really just another form of bondage. A prison of the self, as C.S. Lewis calls it. A solitary confinement where we are slaves to our own desires, unable to adequately satisfy our insatiable cravings. But as you look more outwardly, I genuinely believe this will make you a better teammate and a better employee and a better spouse and a better parent and a better boss when you seek the good of the whole. When you embrace a communal life where you can be sharpened by other people and you look to contribute to the good of others, even if it costs you something along the way. But before we conclude, I told you I wanted to look at what does the Bible, what does Jesus have to say? Where does Jesus fit in with all of this? And I believe in the end, pastor that recently passed away, he pastored in New York City for a long time. In a message where he's talking about a lot of this individualism, and specifically he looks at this guy, this historian who says that religion gives people an outlet to live outwardly, to live for something outside of themselves. Religion in general. And Tim Keller says religion, yes, can make you less selfish, but it also makes us more tribal. And he talked about how even within the context of religion, when we look outwardly, it can easily turn into my group over and against another group. And this is true for more than just religion, right? The political polarization and tribalism of our day shows me that we can so quickly even take virtues like altruism and love and contributing to others and define them in our own way and then decide that any other definition is evil and wrong, and people who ascribe to that other definition are evil and wrong, and then I become only for the good of my own tribe. But Jesus offers us a better way. Not only does he free us from the bondage that is self-fulfillment and expressive individualism, he also offers us a pathway of love and humility and self-sacrifice even towards those who disagree with me or oppose me or are in a different tribe. And this seems almost unthinkable. This is some of the stuff we think about when we speak of God's upside-down kingdom, where God takes societal norms or natural human inclinations and flips them on their head to show us a better way, a path that is truly fulfilling. in a way that we wouldn't expect. It actually makes me think of this one scene in Harry Potter, in the Sorcerer's Stone, where they're right towards the end of the movie, where they're trying to get to the stone, and they fall on what's called the devil's snare, this big vine plant, right? Funny enough, this is right before the scene that's kind of become infamous on TikTok and social media recently, where, Ron says, "Not me, not Hermione." You guys finish it. Yo, you got it. Right before that, they get caught in the devil's snare. It's this big vine, and it begins to trap them and ensnare them, right? And they begin to fight against it and try to pull it off and try to free themselves from this plant. But it's not working. It only gets worse. It only tightens its grip. And all of a sudden, Hermione just sits completely still. And she sinks through the plant, and she falls down to the ground safely below. And she yells back up at them, and she says, Stop wrestling with it. Like, just relax. It's only going to kill you faster if you don't. And Ron says, "Thank you. Now I can definitely relax," right? But Harry relaxes and calms down, and he falls through and makes it safely. And then Hermione remembers, oh yeah, sunlight. They don't like sunlight, so she casts a spell, and Ron falls through, and they all get through safely. But they had this realization that the way to freedom was actually in giving themselves up. And here's what Jesus does. He steps down onto earth, sent as the Son of God, and he steps into a real culture, a real time in human history, and speaks to people in a culture, in an empire that's projecting its power and its dominance, and even a society where religious leaders sought status and prestige and sought their own self-promotion. And yet Jesus steps in and proclaims the ideals of self-sacrifice. Matthew 23:11, Jesus says, "The greatest among you shall be your servant." In Matthew 22, just a chapter before, he says the whole law, everything that they were trying to do and follow in to be obedient to God, is summed up in two commands: to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and then to love your neighbor, those around you, outside of you, as yourself, aka sacrificially. Paul, even as he recounts the humility of Christ and calls us to model that, he tells the believers in Philippi to consider others as more important than themselves. Jesus flips the whole of human existence on its head, and maybe it's best summed up in Matthew 16:24 and 25, where Jesus says, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life," or in other words, his autonomy, his individual self on this earth, "whoever would save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it." So what he says is that the way to life, to liberation, and yes, even happiness is found in giving yourself away for the sake of Jesus. What grounds these claims? What gives Jesus the authority, or maybe even audacity, to call us to such a challenging and upside down way? He became the perfect sacrifice. He sacrificed himself for you and have chosen ourselves over the God who created us. But because of God's great love for us, he sent Jesus, his only Son, who gave his life so that in faith we may find ours. And in doing so, he also modeled for us love for those outside of our tribe, as he died for those who didn't agree with him, who mocked him, who spat on him, who beat him, and ultimately who put him to death. And he beckons his disciples, including you and me, follower of Jesus, to follow him in this example toward love and self-sacrifice and humility toward all peoples, even those that disagree with us. I want to finish with one final quote from Tim Keller, and then give three specific applications for the followers of Jesus in this room. This quote, Tim Keller shows us that the gospel leads us towards humility and away from pride that this tribalism and ideological war sometimes can tempt us toward. He says, take the gospel to the center of your life, and you'll be humbled before people who don't believe what you believe. You'll seek to serve the people who don't believe what you believe. And you'll know that a man who loves people who don't love him is what your whole life is built on. Do you want this incredible force to be released into the world? I hope you do. And here's how you do it. If you believe the gospel, believe it more deeply than you ever have before. And if you don't believe the gospel, consider believing it and become part of what the world needs. So as Tim Keller says there, if you haven't believed the gospel, I want to just invite you this morning to consider it. To consider this message that Jesus came and actually offers us a better way. Though I believe in just looking outward, yes, you can live a life that is maybe happier and more satisfying. As Jesus said in the passage I just read, what would it gain you if you did all those things and achieved all those things at the forfeit of your own soul? So I invite you to consider this gospel. And I would love to answer your questions or listen to your objections or just have a conversation. But if you have believed the gospel, the call, as Tim Keller said, is to believe it more deeply. To believe that it calls us to a life of radical, loving community with one another in the face of this radically individualistic culture, and radical love and humility toward all people, regardless of what they believe or how they do not live what you believe. So here's 3 specific applications for the followers of Jesus in the room, and then we'll be done. Number 1, fight for community. Fight for community with one another. Like, y'all, my Monday night small group sometimes is inconvenient. It meets in Taylor's, it's a 20-minute drive. Sometimes I don't want to go, but I fight for that because I need people in my life who are not only just doing life with me, but challenging me and shaping me and molding me. Would it be easy for me to say, yeah, I can do this thing on my own. I don't really have to go to small group, or maybe I can watch church online. Yes, it would be easy, but no, we need each other. So open yourselves to other people and seek community and fight for it. Number 2, submit our desires to the Lord. Not everything that we feel or want is for our good. So we trust God when He tells us what is best. And we look to His word as our authority for determining those things. We are not our own authority, and that is a good thing, I promise you. So we submit our desires to the Lord. And similarly, number 3, look to Christ to define our identity. Knowing that we're not defined by our desires, we're not defined by our inner selves, but by who we are in Christ. That we're loved and redeemed and forgiven and made new. We're works in progress, yes, but we are given a purpose. And part of that purpose is living as a light in a culture caught in the devil's snare of radical individualism. And letting that light shine toward the path of freedom that is found in ultimate surrender to Christ. Not looking within, but looking to the cross. So let me pray for us this morning and ask the Lord to help us do that. Lord, thank you for your word and for truth. Lord, thank you, even as we just prayed before the service, that all truth is your truth. That as we look at culture and look at trends and the different things around us, Lord, that we can examine them with wisdom from your word and from your spirit. And so I pray that you help us to do that. And I pray, God, that you help us to model the life of Jesus, who gave himself up for me, for people who were opposed to him, who have chosen our own way. And he models love and self-sacrifice and humility toward all peoples. And so, Lord, would you help us do both? Lord, I pray for anyone in this room that is just wrestling with questions of faith and doubts. Lord, I believe that the world functions best in your ways because you created it. And so I pray that we can see that, even in data and science and sociology and these things, God. That these things point us back to you and your intelligent design and your creation, and that those ways are better. And so I pray that anyone in this room that's just having questions, Lord, would seek the answers, and that you would meet them in those spaces. Lord, thank you for each and every student here at NGU. Thank you for the staff, the faculty, for all the people here. Would you be with us the rest of this week, Lord, as we seek to honor you and live in a way that reflects the love and the grace, the humility of Jesus. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. You guys are dismissed.